Hello and welcome. Today is 11/11/23, November 11th, 2023, and this is the 2023 A Strike Odyssey podcast. And happy Veterans Day to everyone. We wanted to start with that. And today we have a veteran with us, a veteran reporter and longtime entertainment industry expert, Jonathan Handel, and we're going to be discussing the new SAG-AFTRA deal that was just negotiated this week. So welcome, Jonathan. You also do reporting for the Puck. I know you're going to be going live tomorrow. You could tell us about that too.
Sure. So I'm an entertainment and technology attorney and also a journalist. For 10 years, concurrent with my law practice, I wrote for the Hollywood Reporter, wrote about 1,400 stories that time, which works out to 3 a week. Don't ask me how I managed to do that, but I did somehow while practicing law. I now write for Puck once or twice a week, Thursdays and or Sundays. And I've been writing for Puck for the last year, covering the run-up to what turned into a historic pair of strikes that, as everyone knows, idled this industry for 6 months, starting in May and finally concluding just a few days ago, starting in May with the writer's strike. Then the actors went out on strike as well. The writer's strike resolved, and now the actors' strike has resolved. The question is what? Well, yeah, I was going to say the question is what the industry is going to look like after that. But yes, go ahead.
How many days was the Writers Guild strike?
Well, that's a stump the stars. I think it was over 150 days, I believe.
Right, and this strike was just over 118, right? The SAG-AFTRA?
Right, so just shy of 4 months of the SAG-AFTRA.
So we have these concurrent strikes that lasted, like you said, almost 6 months,
right,
well into 6 months, and the SAG-AFTRA still hasn't been ratified.
Hasn't been ratified, but the strike is over. Important to know.
So they can work. So it's interesting. I wanted to start with a couple of questions about the effects and what the people on some of the actors on the street are talking about right now. So the deal was negotiated, I believe it was on the 9th or the 8th, right?
I'll take your word for it. I'm
11/8.
Every day blurs into the other.
Yeah, and then the 9th is when it was effective at midnight, 12:01, 11/9 yesterday. Or 9 to 10. I think yesterday.
The day before yesterday, Thursday night. It was
before.
effective 12:01. It was effective Wednesday. What it felt like was Wednesday midnight. Technically, it was 12:01 a.m. Thursday.
So it's now Saturday. So it's only been about 48 hours that people have been talking. And this morning I ran into another veteran, let's say A-list actor, who we discussed the SAG-AFTRA guild and the deal. And he was concerned. He still hasn't seen it. He had previously served on the board before as well. And that I was curious, when have you been able to see this agreement yet? Like, where is it?
No, the agreement hasn't been disclosed yet. It's expected within the next several days that it will be. The sort of sequencing was that they held a press conference yesterday after the board voted. So the process was that the negotiating committee actually unanimously recommended the deal. The board then voted, and that also triggered the end of the strike that at midnight, as we talked about. The board voted yesterday 86% to 14% in favor of the deal. And it now goes to the members, who will surely ratify it. Exactly what percentage, we don't know. It's usually in the 90s. It probably will be. Maybe it'll be in the high 80s. Who knows? But again, with all due respect to the process, it only takes 50%, so it will be ratified. The information that was released, at first was very little, then a little bit more at the press conference. They released some bullet points today in a press release. And the members will receive a probably 5 or 10 page summary of the deal on Tuesday, when the ballot materials go out, and they have 3 weeks to vote. Exactly when the contract language itself will be released, there's probably a 90 page, detailed contract language that most people can't make heads or tails of. That we don't know exactly, but it'll probably be in the next few days or so.
The reason I ask is because I want to compare this to the Writers Guild. Their agreements, it seemed to me, if I remember correctly, is they had the memorandum of agreement and they had their points up pretty concurrently with when it was ratified, not ratified, maybe.
Well, before the sequencing was somewhat similar with the Writers Guild as it is with SAG-AFTRA. All three of the unions, the above the line unions, speaking to them in particular, the DGA as well, in other words, sort of follow that practice that they'll announce, when a deal is reached, but the board won't have formally received it at that point, and so they don't release the MOA, the actual contract language, MOA, MOU, whatever they want to call it, memorandum of agreement, memorandum of understanding, until some point when the members are receiving material. It's always a bit of a struggle to sort of yank that out of their hands.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the people, well, the person I spoke with this morning is concerned because he'd like to see the deal. And so at this point, I'm going to ask you a question, because this is one of the points he brought up, is he's very well known and respected and, you would think doing very well. However, he has lost his pension or his health benefits. So his health insurance now, and he's going to have to look to Medicare. And that was a big concern. And so do you know anything about how this deal is going to affect the health insurance, if at all?
I do, actually. And, as background for why someone in that position might lose their health insurance, to qualify for SAG-AFTRA health insurance, you have to make a certain amount of acting earnings in a year.
26,800 or so.
Yeah, I know it's around 26,000, and exactly that may be the exact figure. Now, for people who are not in retirement status, their residuals count towards that income threshold. So it's their upfront compensation and their residual compensation. For people who are in a retirement status, before the SAG and AFTRA health plans merged, which was 2017, residuals did not count under the SAG plan, and probably not under the AFTRA plan as well. All that counted was your initial compensation earnings, your session fees. When the health plans merged, the unions merged in 2012. The health plans didn't merge till January of 2017. When the plans merged, the new plan had a better characteristic, which was that residuals would continue to count. However, several years ago, in the face of financial pressures and all of that, healthcare costs going up, the need for some money to go to the pension plan rather than the health plan, because to keep that healthy in terms of investment income, because there's a push me pull you effect that the employer pays 21% at this point, 21% on top of the salaries and on top of residuals, and that money is certain amount of that 21% goes to help the health plan, a certain amount goes to fund the pension plan. So there's a trade-off between the two. In any case, what happened was that they stopped allowing residuals to count. I believe for people in retirement status, I believe, unless you are making some money from initial compensation, if you're still working, even quote unquote $1 of session fees, then I believe that your residuals will count also. But if you're truly retired, you haven't made any money in the given 12-month period from session fees, from actual active acting, then the residuals that you're getting from past work will not count towards the 26,000, and so you won't meet the 26,000. And everyone 65 and older is eligible for Medicare in this country, which is pretty solid health insurance. The SAG health insurance, of course, has advantages. It's among the best union health insurances in the country, I believe. And plus, if you're eligible for it and you're over 65, then you have Medicare as a backup. So you have even better coverage. You have secondary coverage as well. So that would be how someone is in this situation. And there was a lawsuit filed over this, that the union, it's important to note, it's not the union that unilaterally makes the decision. The health plan and the pension plan, for that matter, are governed by federal law, are governed by a board of trustees that's 50-50 management and labor. So that was a decision of the trustees. Some of the trustees are active executives of, on the union side, are active executives from the union. Others are potentially past executives or past board members, potentially current board members. So it's not the case that when a new board gets elected or something, that they turn over the trustees altogether. By any means.
This segues into a great point, because it is a separate entity, but there are some provisions that pertain to pension and health, namely residuals that they are negotiating. But that brings me to another point. So let's just take the pension and health fund. Like you said, it's funded by the guild and the union, the collective bargaining agreement.
By the employers,
contribution, which is subject to collective bargaining. And that's why it's called deferred initial compensation, because if it weren't, they couldn't pay the pension and health, because it has to be compensation too. So they've called it things differently to qualify. So let's digress. So just look at the pension and health board, what you just talked about. It's 50% management and it's 50% union members.
Union appointees.
Right, union appointees. But for the most part.
For staff and members and past staff.
But currently, I believe a lot of non-staff SAG AFTRA members are on that board.
Right.
Now, let me ask you, because this person who was concerned about his residuals and losing, or his health insurance and losing them, even though he's a big star, he also mentioned something really else that was interesting. And that board, when you have those, it's a big job to be on a pension and health board.
Right.
You read through documents that are, thick, and it's a lot of responsibility, right?
It is, and there's a lot, and those documents that you mentioned rightly are not only heavily legalistic, they are heavily mathematical and economic, because a couple things to think about. First of all, I mentioned the trade-off between funding the pension plan versus funding the health plan. Secondly, there's a trade-off between benefits versus eligibility. Okay, if you work for Google or for Prudential Insurance or whoever, GM, you're a full-time employee, you get health insurance, pardon me, and you get whatever the benefits are. But with gig-based work, such as what actors do, you have to decide, is someone who does one acting job a year going to be eligible? Well, no, as we said, there's this $26,000 a year threshold. Then you might say, well, why not set the threshold lower so more people qualify? Because only about it's either 14% or 18%, I forget which, of SAG membership qualifies in a given year for health insurance. So you might say, well, why not set it at 15,000 or something? I mean, someone who does an acting job, they have 15K. That sounds like maybe an actor. I can't get that job. Shouldn't they get health insurance? Okay, if you do that, more people will be eligible for health insurance. But guess what? The pot of money doesn't increase. And so that means that the benefits have to decrease. If you if you make the eligibility
lower,
liberal, better, you make the benefits worse.
Right.
There's a trade-off there. And then you say, well, let's put more money to the health plan. Then you say, all right, you're going to drive the pension plan into a difficult funding terrain where it might not be able 30 years out to pay the pensions it's promised. So that's the trade-off. And that's why these documents and these decisions are excruciating.
Yeah. And it's time, effort, energy. They have days of meetings, and not only just the meetings, but the actual work to put into the meeting. So here's my question too, because it brings me to this other point. On those pension and health boards, you can bet every single one of management representatives is being paid.
Well, it's part of their
not working for free. They're not working for free. Whereas, but for the SAG employees who are making money, let's say, I don't know what the executive director's salary is. Do you?
Yeah, it's about $1 million. close to $1 million.
Okay, so he's definitely being paid, I would say, to be on this board. I'm sure he's on the pension and health board as well. But let's take another member. Let's call him David, I don't know, Jones.
Yeah, no, it's not a paid position. That's right.
And it's not a paid, but those actors that serve in that capacity, they're not getting a dime, right?
Right. And likewise, by the way, the actors who serve on the SAG board itself, SAG-AFTRA board itself, that's unpaid. Even the president, Fran Drescher, who spent a lot of time, Gabrielle Cartier's before her, spent a lot of time, Ken Howard, unpaid.
And this is something that this actor is very concerned about because he's a big union advocate. And his question to me is, how and why has this union not replicated what the United Auto Workers is doing and other very well-respected unions that, as you know, the UAW just came up with an amazing deal, right? Historic on their gains with their strike. But guess what? When they go live on their press conferences, is their staff member speaking or is the elected president the one that speaks first?
Likewise with SAG, the president spoke first at the press conference I was at.
When I saw it yesterday, I believe Duncan opened, but I think you should rewatch that.
I believe Fran
At 2:30 it came on live.
At
2:40.
no, at 2:20, at 2:23.
So I'm going to go back and watch that again, but
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Fran first. It's both. Look, both of them have been spending. Yeah, it was 2:23. Was it Duncan first? I think it was. I thought it was Fran, but
either or.
Either or. They both.
Point is, the United Auto Workers, when they're going live, do they have their staff speak, or does the president who's being paid speak?
The president who's being paid is different from the structure of the entertainment unions. In the entertainment unions, the president doesn't get paid. In the above the line entertainment unions, the president does not get paid. The top staff director gets paid. So the president of the DGA, the president of the Writers Guild, the president of SAG, the president of AFTRA, the president of SAG-AFTRA now, they do not get paid. Neither do the board members. The executive director does get paid. There are different unions are structured in different ways, and some are structured such that the member who gets elected as president is, and also secretary treasurer, for example, is paid.
And this is the union member's question, who's a big advocate of unions. And this is something I want to kind of, let's talk about paradigm shifts. And this could be something he's curious about is it in the best interest of now SAG is not only the most numbers, what they have 160,000. Now, Fran Drescher said, now they're the most powerful, right? So they're not just the largest, they're the most powerful, I think is what she said yesterday.
Right.
At the press conference. Is it time?
Yeah, and you're right. Duncan did speak first, now that I think about it.
So that kind of shows you a pecking order, but some would argue, I could be wrong. The question is that this person raised to me today is, does it serve these union members, many of them like him, who are huge stars who are now in need of health insurance? Maybe the union structure with staff might be interested in looking at how the other top unions in the country are working.
Well, that's a decision for the members to make, actually, not for the staff to make.
Right. This is a member who's asking.
Right.
And I think this is an issue when it comes to these type of decisions and as labor evolves.
All right. So let me actually also finish answering your earlier question, which was, what is there in this agreement that addresses pension and health?
Yeah.
The pension and health plans, as I alluded to, are funded by what is now reached a 21% contribution by the companies on that's calculated as 21% of salaries, including and of residuals, of initial comp and residuals. But there is a cap on the amount of salary that is subject to that 21%, and income above that cap is not subject to any contribution at all. The cap, when it comes to episodic television, had not been raised in 43 years. It had been static, which meant that there was a lot of, as salaries increased over time due to inflation and due to contract gains, there was a lot of compensation that was not being subject to, if you want to call it taxation, was not being subject to the 21%
payments into the health
and pension funds. The union wanted those caps to be raised dramatically to account for inflation. The companies offered a much smaller increase in the caps. The union got a significant increase. I think it was a 43% increase in the caps, not as much as they were looking for, but negotiation is not a shopping spree. You don't get everything you want or even everything that you arguably deserve.
Are you talking about the writers and the directors or the actors?
No, I'm talking about the actors. This is actor specific.
So how much did the writers get in their caps? Like, do you know?
The actors' caps work different. The writers' caps work differently, and they got a slight increase in their caps.
Good, but that's a huge increase then. 43%.
It's a huge increase it appears to be a huge increase for SAG-AFTRA, and that will increase funding to the health plan. And at least according to at least one source, there is hope, not promise, but hope that they can restore the health plan for seniors as a result of this. So there is movement on that issue, I think is the fair thing to say.
That's really good news. Is that in what they released online? Did you find that 43% figure there?
No, I found it in, I believe it's in what they just sent me today in their press release.
Okay, so yeah, because I haven't seen that. That's news to me. So thank you.
Yeah.
But let's go back to his ultimate question.
The other point then, so to address that, the question of whether, first of all, to understand, there are all sorts of cross currents and call them political and structural stresses in each of these unions, especially SAG-AFTRA, but to an extent in each of them. There are stresses, and let's just sort of inventory them. There are stresses within the membership. SAG-AFTRA has two distinct political factions that did come together on a unity slate for the elections this year. Membership First, and the faction that has been in control since 2009 is Unite for Strength. Membership First was in control of SAG before that, and 2009 again was even before merger, which was 2012. And Unite for Strength was very much focused on merging the unions and decreasing the level of stress between the two unions, between SAG versus AFTRA. So there are levels of stress there. There are levels of stress between political activists and who choose who they want to have run for president or to seek out a candidate for president, and the president themselves. Fran Drescher, for example, she's president now, and she's very high profile, and she is the top elected official for the union. Was
unpaid?
Yeah, but let's get to that in a minute. All right, hold on. The point I'm trying to make is, did Fran Drescher work her way up in union service? Was she vice president last time? No. Was she secretary treasurer last time? No. Was she on the board last time? No. Was she on lots of committees doing work last time? No. She was sought out by political activists in Unite for Strength and agreed to run. So they had more power than she did. She didn't have power. She wasn't an officer at all. But then she gets elected. Now she has power, more power than they do. So there's an inherent, what I'm trying to point out is there's an inherent stressor there. Likewise, on the Membership First side, they had Matthew Modine running a couple terms ago. I forget who ran last time. I apologize. But for example, when they went to Matthew Modine, he, I think, had been on the board, but hadn't been a prominent member of the, deeply involved, I don't think. And he wasn't part of the core. The point is, you have core activists, but because SAG is focused on star power in its presidency in particular, The core activists have to go to someone with some star power who usually is not a core activist and get that person to run for president on their ticket. And then when that person runs, they have the visibility the core activists don't. So there's stress there. Now, go to the staff side. There's stress within the staff. Any big organization has political factions within it. Some of these mirror, Unite for Strength versus Membership First. Some people more aligned with the one than the other. Others are just like any workplace, any big workplace, who likes who's and who's the golden haired person, who's not. And then there is stress between the stress that you pointed out, the stress between the staff and the members and the elected leadership. Who is running this union? Is it the staff? Is it the members? Now, most of the members are not lawyers. They're not economists. They're not mathematically minded. They don't know how to do what's necessary to be done.
But can't you say
Right,
that
but let me
machinist
finish.
union too?
What?
And carpenters, machinist union,
No,
or mechanics?
no, not to this degree. And here's why. Those unions have 100-page collective bargaining agreements. The SAG-AFTRA, if you make a TV show under SAG-AFTRA, the SAG-AFTRA agreements are 1,500 pages. Residuals are a large part of the difference. Two things, residuals and the gig-based nature of employment, okay? Both of those things introduce enormous complications in the employment relationship that do not exist in any other profession. If you make a movie or TV show under SAG-AFTRA, writers, directors, and IATSE, you're talking 2,000 pages of union agreement. And to effectively negotiate the SAG-AFTRA agreement, you have to understand the parallelism with residuals, the pattern bargaining, in your sister unions agreements. So you have to understand not only 1,500 pages of SAG-AFTRA, you have to understand 800, 900 pages now of Writers Guild and 800 odd pages of Directors Guild, or at least those portions that relate to residuals.
Let me ask you a question before below line unions.
Can you hold the
Yeah.
question for a sec? Because I want to get to what actors do know that staff doesn't know. Actors work the contracts. The actors work under these agreements. Most of the staff has never been an actor. There's actually one staff member in New York who was an actor, who's now a staff member, was a SAG-AFTRA member. But by and large, they haven't. They are lawyers and advisors to lawyers, such as economists, heavily stacked with lawyers. They understand legal drafting. They understand loopholes. I mean, there is no provision in any of these agreements for any of these unions that doesn't have a rule that has a carve out, and a carve out that has an exception, and an exception that has a caveat, and a caveat that has a loophole. There's absolutely no provision in these agreements that doesn't have potentially 5 layers deep of loopholes and carve outs and exceptions. And you might say, well, but that's down in the weeds, those little loopholes. No, some of those loopholes could potentially be big enough to drive a truck through, or as we say in the law biz, that the loophole potentially swallows the rule.
Right.
So,
it's like kind of like what's happening in government, maybe.
It's very much
so big.
the best. There's
The tax code.
legislation in government, like the tax code, for example, that is extraordinarily complex and specialized. And words don't necessarily mean what they. I mean, motion picture in the union agreements, in all these union agreements, above and below lines, does not mean a movie. Television motion picture does not mean a TV movie. A motion picture is either a television motion picture or a theatrical motion picture. Theatrical motion picture is what you and I think of as a movie. You go to the movie theater and see it. Television motion picture sounds like a movie that's made for Netflix or TV. No, television motion picture is either a movie for television or, believe it or not, an episode of a series. So an episode of a series is actually a flavor of television motion picture, which is a flavor of motion picture. Why? Who knows? Are they ever going to change the terminology? Don't bet on it. What is the definition of production executive in the Writers Guild agreement? Somebody who has the duties in 1977 of any of the following people:
Yep.
including Alan Ladd Jr., who with all due respect, I don't even know if he's alive anymore. I always fantasized that I would call him up and say, so Laddie, what did you do in 77? You're like, fuck you, another one of those calls, and then you get hung up on. What are you supposed to do with that? Two of the residuals rules in the Writers Guild agreement. There's one that's called for cable TV, there's one that's called Sanchez, which is also used in the DGA and SAG-AFTRA agreement. There's another that's called Hitchcock. Why are they called this? Sanchez of Bel Air. Remember that show? No, of course you don't remember that show. But that was the formula that was used for that show. Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Maybe you've heard of it, that 1950s show with black and white Alfred Hitchcock. No, we're talking about the color remake, actually, from 1977 or something, 71. I don't know. So it's like, these agreements in many ways are like roach motels. Contract clauses check in, but they seldom check out. So they are filled with provisions that no longer apply, with terminology that makes no sense, with footnotes that attempt to be explanatory, like the new media footnotes that date, some of them date to 2001, actually. And it says platforms such as, and are they mentioning Netflix? No, Netflix was a DVD service. They're mentioning some platform. I don't remember the name of the platform they're mentioning. It's supposed to be an explanatory example of, to help you understand the definition. You're like, well, that doesn't help me much. Movie.
Well, I've got two words that come to mind as you say all this and explain the guild agreements.
Yeah.
Job security.
Those are two words. The other thing is, you might ask, well, why not just clean it all up? Okay. Whose negotiating leverage are you going to expend to clean this all up? And then how are you going to go back when there's a disagreement on the new language? How are you going to go back to the existing arbitration agreements to see how they were interpreted? What does distributor's gross mean? Do you look at the X or the Y? Well, there's an arbitration decision on that, but we no longer use the term distributor's gross. So does that apply? Not apply? We don't know. So you wipe the slate clean, and you've got a mess.
You have really outlined a lot of food for thought when people are asking these questions. And this morning, this actor was asking, why isn't this union more modeled on the AFL-CIO unions that are like the UAW?
It is an AFL-CIO.
I know it is, but they're paid versus
some aren't. The UAW is. I don't know about the Teamsters. I don't know about the this or the that.
The Teamsters, I believe, are.
They might. The plumber. I don't know.
The machinists definitely are.
I don't know which
auto workers are.
All right. Bottom line, I don't know which is more prevalent, and I'm neither accepting nor rejecting the premise that somehow this is an outlier. But the question I do ask is, why do you think that would be an improvement? What would make it an improvement?
I think when
Fran got paid.
Yeah. So I think there's a perception, and I'm not saying if it's real or not, that the people who are serving are maybe not able, like if you look at Ronald Reagan in 1960, when he was the president.
Of the union, not of the country, yes.
Of the union, thank you, SAG, Screen Actors Guild before SAG-AFTRA. He was an actor, but he also had producing interests, but he was able to negotiate.
And was he paid? Was he paid?
No, he was not paid. He was not. So he resigned from the union shortly after the 1960 deal and became the producer. So there's a perception, however you want to call it, that maybe the people who are negotiating, and I don't think this is true, but they can't fully step into that role because they could be somehow blackballed in the future. And the reason I say this is because unlike the Directors Guild and the Writers Guild, where they actually list who's on their negotiating committee publicly on their website,
right? The
Screen Actors Guild does not share that.
They don't, but the companies know who's on it because they're negotiating with them.
Right.
So if the companies wanted to blackball those people, they'd be able to. And
that's the question. I don't have the answer.
But if they got paid, how much would they get paid? Would they get paid $100,000 to serve on the board? No.
These are questions I'm not going to.
So and by the way, you serve on the board for a term or two and then you're done and then you're blackballed. So you're in your hypothesis. So how does that help you?
Yeah, I think there's a perception, and I'm not saying if it's accurate or not, that somehow if the actors who were serving on the board were paid, that they would be able to not be paid fairly for their work. Like even on the pension and health, let's be honest, like they're doing a lot of work for free. It's just a different way of looking at it. So it's not just
I don't think it addresses the problem though. I mean, the question of whether you should get paid for service, and what about the people that run some of the committees that spend, enormous numbers of hours doing that
well,
aren't
let's
elected.
just broaden this
But
out to like city councils, because I did serve on one where it was basically the volunteer versus the staff.
right,
That was the city manager that's paid. And then the volunteers that are getting a very small salary, maybe $500 a month for a lot of work,
right,
versus the city council in Los Angeles, where it is a job, or the supervisors where they do get paid and they are in charge, not their staff. So it's a much bigger
right.
issue.
This is the principal. This is what's referred to as the principal agent problem,
Right.
right?
And it's just a matter of who is empowered and who is really in charge. And for all the reasons you've said, maybe it is better to have a professional manager or a professional executive director. And many cities, even Malibu does that. And maybe it's not. It's just an issue that has a lot of pros on one side and cons.
Mhm.
And I think as I looked at that press conference yesterday, I think the executive director did an amazing job, and so did the president. They both were equal. It's just interesting to me that the members are asking this question this morning, and that is a valid concern that you and you set out some good examples of what
Right.
that
I think it's important to note that the way SAG-AFTRA comes up with negotiating priorities is through a grassroots process.
and committee.
No, not a committee, a wages and working process committee, meeting process that is open to all members, both in terms of physical meetings and now Zoom meetings, and email and everything, where anyone can suggest contract priorities for the next round of negotiation. And those are then, and they filter and review hundreds, if not over 1,000. I don't know how many suggestions they get. And through a committee process, yes, then refine that into what is a longer list of priorities than either of the other two above the line unions ever submit. And was even longer this year. SAG-AFTRA is known for having more negotiating deal points and priorities and achievements and gets in any given cycle than either the Writers or Directors Guild. And they got an exceptionally large list this time that applied to, background and the pension and health and the big things that we've talked about, that everyone's talked about, the AI, the streaming residuals, the basic wage increases, also protections on self-tape auditions, a whole, host of things that I, obviously can't remember the whole list off the top of my head.
But yeah, no, I agree. And I think the other guilds act after, for example, the DGA had that horrible case this year where the assistant director was shot on set, right? Or that was a couple years ago. And so now they have a whole provision addressing safety on the set with respect to those types of issues. And it was forced because of a tragedy. So you're right. But let's get back to this. So this issue, I feel really great that we were able to discuss some of the pros and cons and why is the union run the way it is. And when you're looking at these, when the information will be released, hopefully soon. And in retrospect, before we finish this, what is if you think you could wave a magic wand with this SAG-AFTRA, this is going to be at least 90 pages. We don't know how many but the Writers Guild was 90,
85 or something,
90,
94.
94.
Yeah.
The writers. So hopefully, I don't know. What do you say? What do you say on that number of pages? I'm just curious.
Oh, the over under. I think it's probably close to 100 pages, 90 or 100.
Yeah. So 90 or 100. So you're hedging your bet. Can't come up with one number, but in any event,
when I go to Vegas, I don't even
exactly
put a quarter in the machine.
So the question is, I think there's pros and cons as the actors are getting this agreement and really digesting these points. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But for the most part, I think everyone can say this was a hard-earned fight, and that as the points are released, they will be reflected upon, and more actors can really digest and ask those questions, and others like that.
Right. When at least 25, if at least 25% of the board had voted no, I believe that's the threshold, they would have the right to issue a minority report or dissenting report.
And they didn't
go
get
out.
that number.
And that number was not reached. And there was not, according to my sources, it was not an organized opposition of like those who voted against all had one issue in mind and were concerned about the deal in that way. And in fact, what I was told was that those who voted against actually felt that it overall was a good deal, but that it was missing some point related to background actors or some point what most of us would consider more miscellaneous points that to them was a strong enough issue that they wanted to vote against. So I suspect, by the way, that the reason the press conference was delayed in an hour and 20 minutes was that they were probably hashing out that question and trying to get a unanimous vote.
Yeah. Well, on this Veterans Day, I appreciate your time, and we're going to come back because right now we don't have the agreement. I'm not going to really be able to speak to specific points until we actually have the written word. So I just am so grateful for your expertise. You're a veteran expert in this industry, and I learned a lot. And I hope these questions we posed today give people food for thought about what's happened and how it's affecting them, especially with pension and health, and how hopefully that will be with this 48% or 43% increase in the caps, that will help satisfy some of those outstanding issues, and the people can get more health benefits and not less in the future.
Hopefully so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aloha. And until next time, I'll see you soon.
See you soon. Bye-bye.